Hey everybody, it is You Had to Ask, the show where I answer your questions, and this week my first question comes from Deeker Jones, who says, "Hey Steve, do you really feel that atheism is a group that needs a face? To me, atheism is nothing more than a response to a singular claim, that being the existence of or belief in gods. Atheism says nothing about a person and their worldview other than their belief in the claims being made by theists. Shouldn't all the other issues, such as feminism, be completely separate? P.S. Love the show. I can't get enough of your type of sensible and even-tempered debate." I think we need to be careful how we use the term atheism so that we're not equivocating. Because atheism is, as you say, a very simple position, a singular claim, an opinion or a conclusion or what have you on the existence or non-existence of gods. But that doesn't mean that atheism isn't also a group. Because it is. There are multiple atheists in the world. And even though we may be unified by one single simple claim, like gods don't exist, we're still a group. No matter how simple the defining belief is, we are still a group, we are still a collection of people, and we are still viewed as such by people from outside the group, by people who do not share that atheist position that we all hold. And whether we like it or not, we are judged as a group, and whether we like it or not, whether we think it's fair or not, our group does have a face, as it were. We are perceived and judged as a group by people who are not atheists. It bothers me that to people who are not atheists, people with whom we have to come into contact with, people with whom we both desire to engage with and often can't avoid engaging with, will perceive us and judge us and define us by these angry, anti-religious, anti-feminist people. I would like for our voice, for our face, for our group to be defined in a different way, to put a different face forward to the world. And we can argue over whether or not it's fair that atheists have a collective face, whether or not it's fair that people who are not atheists look at us and judge us collectively and perceive us as a group. The fact is they do. And it bothers me when I hear people who are not atheists talking about people who are atheists as though we are all, or we are predominantly, of the angry, woman-hating, religion-hating, hostile, argumentative, smug, know-it-all type of asshole atheist that is very prevalent, particularly on the internet and here on YouTube. It bothers me. I would like to see that change. I would like to do whatever small part I can to change it, because even though atheism is a singular claim, atheists also constitute a group. And we have a face whether you think we should or not. Mandrax Hair. "Hey Steve, don't you think that the hateful bigots and the hateful feminists, e.g. subreddit shit Reddit says, are just two sides of the same coin? They seem to be in an escalating perpetual race to the bottom and don't have the self-awareness to see it. They only venture away from their hug box / circle jerk wherever, only to see something they find objectionable and take it back to their in-group to make fun of it or talk about how shitty everything is. There seems to be this paranoia from both sides that there is a cabal of the other side that is in power too, when both sides of the issue are really fringe. If you disagree, why? Thanks." I don't disagree with the essence of what you're saying. I would stop short myself of drawing an exact equivalence between who you describe as the hateful feminists and the hateful anti-feminists or the hateful bigots. As someone else mentioned in a comment responding to your question, often, and this has been my experience as well, often the really angry feminists, the really angry, hateful, bitter, hostile feminists are angry or bitter or hostile about something that is legitimate. They may be taking it too far, they may be allowing their emotions to overwhelm them, they may be going into sort of a counterproductive mode by being so angry and so hostile and so aggressive, but at the root of it, there is a legitimate source of their anger, of their response. Whereas the anti-feminists, I don't really see that. I do agree with you, though, completely that the pattern of getting angry about something, getting offended about something, and taking it back to your in-group, and just, getting all worked up and sort of throwing it out to the echo chamber, and every time it comes back it's louder and more angrier, and directing it at individuals, this sort of YouTube call-out culture where somebody says something objectionable in a video, so you make a video not about the topic that you're disagreeing about, but about how this specific person is an asshole, or this specific person should be marginalized or ignored, or whatever. To me, when there are larger issues at play, when there are the sorts of questions that we could be asking that would be of interest to a wider audience, or would be of help in sorting out a larger issue, when you take it and you direct it personally at someone who made a video that you didn't like, you're automatically diminishing it and demeaning it and belittling it and making it into something petty and rendering it just silly personal YouTube drama, as opposed to dealing with something that could actually be useful and compelling in a broader context. So I completely agree with you about that practice. And on top of everything else, I just find it tedious. But I would stop short of saying that the anti-feminist bigots and the angry, aggressive feminists are just two sides of the same coin. I wouldn't go that far as to say that. But the tactics and the practice of just getting super angry and yelling at each other and making it personal are completely counterproductive and a waste of time, and really, really boring. Ahoy Yerno! Hey Steve, I have a question I've wrestled with for a while, and I just can't find the solution. Religions routinely break the law, and I wonder at which point we can demand an organization to respect rights. The Catholic Church refuses women in leadership positions, or even in the clergy at all. Is it reasonable to require a tax-exempt organization to reach the legal quota for women? A similar case may be made for indulgences and other religious services. If an organization sells indulgences, they have to be able to prove the efficacy of their product, that their product even exists. Otherwise, they're just scam artists. But it feels wrong. It goes against the freedom of religion. And yet I believe that the law has to apply to everyone, including religious organizations. Is that too much to ask? Where does the slippery slope start? I don't think it's too much to ask. I agree with you. I think the slippery slope starts when we start granting privileges to religious organizations that they would not get, and in fact probably would not even have the balls to ask for, were it not for the fact that they were religious organizations. I am a huge supporter of religious liberty. I think it's one of the fundamental principles of any democratic state, of any free society, but not because of anything special about religion. It's because freedom of religion is indistinguishable from freedom of conscience. You should have the freedom to believe anything you want, and the government should not have the right to punish you or to revoke rights and privileges from you simply because of what you believe, what you profess to believe, period. It's a fundamental human right, and it should never be threatened, and it should never be taken away without due process or just cause. But that doesn't mean that you can do anything you want. You can conduct your business affairs any way you see fit, as long as you can come up with some religious excuse for it. That, to me, is a perversion of freedom of religion. And it does a disservice to all of us. It is not what is intended, and it is not what best serves our communities and our society as a whole. Religious freedom means you can believe whatever you want. It means that we as a government, we cannot favor one religion over another. We cannot have an established religion, an official religion under the government. But it doesn't mean you can do whatever you want. And that's why I personally don't think that churches should be tax exempt at all, unless they qualify for an exemption if they operate as a charity, let's say. I mean, there's nothing to stop a church from being tax exempt as long as it does something to earn the tax exemption other than just being a church. I just don't think the mere fact that you are a church should qualify you for a tax exemption. Nom the food. Hi, Steve. I recently lost my grandfather, and of course I was very sad and upset about it. My parents are rational people, but especially my dad has stated some belief that there must be something after life. He talked about multiple very unlikely coincidences regarding other passings of friends and family. I myself have even, in my emotional state, thought that it couldn't just have been the case that nothing happens after we or people we love die, even if my rational mind knew that it wasn't likely that the dead are still with us. My question to you is, how do you deal with death in your circle of friends and family? Do you, like me and my dad, temporarily suspend your rationality to help cope? Or do you stay rational no matter what? How does this affect your view on your own death? Wishful thinking like that used to be something that I indulged in. I don't anymore, and it's not even at this point. It's not even something that I have to stop myself from doing. It's just the way I deal with things now. I just operate under the assumption that there isn't an afterlife. That when we die, that's it for us, and I try to reconcile myself to that and to handle the grief of losing someone that you care about the best I can, under that umbrella. I don't think there's anything wrong with being in a state of grief, with being in an emotionally fraught state, with thinking maybe, that disconnected events have some sort of deeper meaning, or that maybe that's a sign, maybe that was my grandfather reaching out to me from wherever he is, trying to tell me something. If that's what you need to do, if that brings you some measure of comfort in your time of grief and sadness, I am certainly not going to tell you that you're doing something wrong by indulging in that. I don't think that it's my place to tell you how to grieve, or to tell your father how to grieve, or anybody else. Whether you are a rational person, whether you consider yourself a skeptic and an atheist and you intellectually don't believe in any of this stuff or not, if that's the place you have to go to emotionally and mentally to help deal with the loss, I personally don't see anything wrong with that. I do not think that that is the same thing as having that as a persistent worldview. I think if you have a persistent worldview that you have no basis for, that can lead you to some troubling places, potentially. But if you're sort of in an extreme emotional state and you're just looking for a handhold and you're just trying to work your way through your grief, and it gives you some pleasure, it gives you some relief to imagine your grandfather or whoever it is still existing in some afterlife somewhere, I'm certainly not going to tell you that you can't do that, or that you're not, you're being a bad atheist for doing that or whatever. That's not my place to do that. I think you should do what you need to do to work through it and to handle it whichever way you can. Rob Santana, Steve, do you find it a bit awkward that you're an atheist after assessing that the truth claims of religion aren't real and God isn't real, yet you are an avid fan of wrestling? Something that is also not real, spoiler. How do you square that? If a person came up to you and told you that they don't believe in God or religious teachings, but consider themselves Christian because it's entertaining, wouldn't you double take? I think this is a poor analogy, because Christianity doesn't present itself as fiction. Christianity presents itself as truth. And you might be saying, well, professional wrestling presents itself as truth as well, but I think the point you're missing is that professional wrestling is a form of theater. Professional wrestling is a type of performance art. Professional wrestling presents itself as real within the context of the wrestling show in a way that is really no different from how a play presents itself as real during the play, or a film presents itself as real while the film is playing. There is an assumed reality on the part of the performers, and the hope is that we, as the members of the audience, will be able to suspend our disbelief and accept this assumed reality and enjoy the story and enjoy the action and enjoy the events and the performances and what have you within those confines and under that assumption. Wrestling operates in just the same way. Now, usually when people who are not wrestling fans express incredulity at someone enjoying wrestling, and they say something like, well, it's fake, right? Or how can you like wrestling? It's not real. I think what they're actually trying to say, even though they're not articulating it in just this way, is that they cannot suspend their disbelief. And I can relate to that. I can't relate to it in terms of wrestling. I mean, sometimes I can. There are some wrestling matches, there are some forms of wrestling or instances of wrestling, particular shows, particular matches, that are such that I can't suspend my disbelief. They're too goofy, they're too wacky, they're too poorly performed or poorly booked, whatever. But the best example for me personally is with musicals. my inability to suspend my disbelief at people within an otherwise realistically depicted story just sort of dropping everything and breaking into song and choreographed dance numbers. My inability to suspend my disbelief at that is a real barrier to me in accepting and enjoying a musical. And in just the same way that I cannot suspend my disbelief for that, I can understand how someone who is not a wrestling fan cannot suspend their disbelief when watching wrestling. And you watch a wrestling match and you think, oh, come on, it's obvious they're not really having a fight. You know, I just can't get into it. I can't get past the fact that it's a work, that as many people say, it's fake, even though wrestling fans don't really like to use that term in that way. So I understand that you can't suspend your disbelief, but what I would say to you when you ask me how can I square being an atheist and square being a wrestling fan is it's no different than having to square being an atheist and being a fan of Star Wars, being a fan of Star Trek. You know, nobody ever says, well, you know, they're not really on a ship, right? You know, there's no such thing as Starfleet. How can you be an atheist and watch this stuff? This is ridiculous. Nobody ever seems to ask that question. But to me, it's no different than asking, how can you like wrestling? You know it's fake. Brandon Nolan. Steve, I'm a middle schooler in a Southern Catholic school and have a hard try segueing with people when all of their points are God did it and you have to have faith. Same with my family. Do you have any advice? The first and most important thing you should do is to always be sure that you know why you believe what you believe. If you have trouble relating to your family and to others because they say things like, well, God did it, or if you have questions that can't be resolved, well, you just have to have faith. If you don't accept that, you have to be able to articulate, both to yourself and to other people, why that is not good enough for you. And sometimes that can be difficult, especially when you first start thinking about these issues. You say you're in middle school. I think it's awesome that you're even questioning these things. I think it's awesome that you are at a point where you're trying to relate to other people who have these different beliefs than you have. I know it's far ahead from where I was when I was in middle school, and I was fairly precocious. But yeah, the first thing you should do before you worry about how to relate to other people or how to get your point of view across to other people who maybe don't have an atheistic point of view or don't have a skeptical or naturalistic point of view is do some thinking on your own. Do some reading, read some books, watch some documentaries, talk to other people maybe who are also atheists or are also skeptics or irreligious or whatever. And just try to understand and get to a point where you can articulate why what people tell you when they say God did it or just have faith, why that's not good enough for you, why you don't believe that. That's step one. And once you get to that point, you can stand on that and you'll be much more confident when you're trying to engage with people and talk to people who disagree with you on these things. Lee Majors. What do you think of movies where the plot happens and then the last scene is 2 or 3 characters who summarize or reflect on the events of the plot? The movies in particular that I think of are Burn After Reading, Red State, and No Country for Old Men. I mean, the plot just ends almost abruptly and transitions to a small room where some people are just talking about what just happened in the movie. Can you think of any other films that do this type of abrupt end then wrap up? Is there a technical term for this? The first movie that comes to my mind when you describe these sorts of scenes is Psycho. Psycho has a scene at the end where the plot has been resolved and then there's a character that sort of reinterprets what happened in the movie and explains it in terms that could easily be understood by anyone in the audience. The technical term, the dramatist's term for this is denouement. That's what it means, or that's what you call it when you have such a scene, when the main plot of the film has been resolved and there's just a little bit of sweeping up left to do, so to speak. There's just a little bit of exposition or explanation, or just everything has to be buttoned up nice and neatly, and that's what happens in a denouement. For instance, if this segment were a drama and we were going to sort of diagram it, let's say when the lightning struck, that would be the climax. And then There would be what you might call some falling action, and then there would be a resolution, or what would also be called a denouement, when I would explain that the sound of the thunderclap signifies that it is now time for
the lightning round. Rapid fire questions, glib and adequate answers.
Aaron Dill. Hey Steve, you said you really like dogs in this video, and I'm sure you also like cats, otherwise why would you have Audie? Which made me wonder, did you have any other animals as pets so far, and are there any you'd like to have one day? I've had fish at various times in my life. I don't have them anymore because it's so depressing. Because for whatever reason, I am not very good at keeping fish. So fish that I have tend to die, and that is so depressing. You get attached to the fish, you give them names, you get to like watching them swim back and forth, and then they're dead, and they're gone forever, and you have to flush them down the toilet or something. It's really depressing, so I don't have fish anymore. And I had hermit crabs when I was little too, but that's about it. Bagser1, Dear Steve, I watched your videos on the MRAs recently, and in it you mentioned a few genuine cases in which men do suffer from inequality. My question to you is, what advice would you give someone looking to address these issues without being dragged down by those petty assholes? Befriend some feminists and ask them how they deal with it. That would be my advice to you. Austin Runge, Hey Steve, what are some of your favorite musicians you love to listen to? Well, they just had a new album come out this past week, so I will say Modest Mouse. Modest Mouse is like my favorite band in the world pretty much, and their new album is pretty good from what I've heard. It usually takes me a couple times listening through it, start to finish, to really get a feel for it and decide if I really like it or not. I've listened to it about 2 or 3 times now, and so far I'm really liking it. So, Modest Mouse, just as one of many examples. Jason Brunet, Dear Steve, what does carpet taste like? You know, I don't know what the carpet tastes like at your place, but around here the carpet tastes like alcohol and isolation. Patrick Dodds, Steve, will you be doing more capsule movie reviews on your channel? And if so, could you give us some not-so-subtle hints on what they might be? I've really enjoyed your video movie reviews for singular films or movie series, and hope you'll do some more in the future. I'm probably going to do something for the release of the Avengers coming up. In the next couple of months, I'll go back and review the Marvel movies that I haven't reviewed yet up to this point. That'll be something. And in October, I'll probably do another series of Halloween-themed reviews, monster movie reviews. And it's probably going to be Hammer films this year, but it's not completely nailed down, but that's probably coming. Hammer films. Cham826. Hi Steve, I have 2 religious co-workers with whom I have lunch almost every day. They know I'm an atheist, and most days religion is not a topic, but occasionally they will get into a discussion about their beliefs and the influence that God is having in their lives, etc. Sometimes these discussions will go on for many minutes while I sit silently waiting for the opportunity to steer the conversation to a mutually interesting topic without asking to outright change the subject. How would you handle this situation? I think you're handling it pretty good. It seems like you and your coworkers get along for the most part. Maybe they're being a little insensitive to you by carrying on conversations about something that they know sort of excludes you as a non-religious person. And if it gets to be that much of a problem for you, if you start to think it's too obnoxious or too, if you feel too left out or whatever, find somewhere else to sit. But it sounds like you're handling it okay. I think you should keep doing what you're doing. Chaos Man 1, but you'll still call out feminism when it purports demonstrably incorrect ideas, such as the 77 cents on the dollar wage gap, right? Well, sure, but I don't think the wage gap falls under that category. The wage gap exists. There are ways of accounting for much of it by citing things other than overt gender discrimination, but that doesn't mean that the wage gap doesn't exist, and it doesn't mean that the wage gap isn't something we should be talking about and addressing. Whether we think that it's all due to gender discrimination or not, the fact is it's there. And a lot of us think that we should be thinking about it and doing something about it and not just ignoring it and saying, oh, well, that's just the way things are going to be. That's not good enough for a lot of people, including myself. Radical Bacon, all things being equal, would you rather shit or piss? Oh, that is so tough. Ugh, I guess piss. It feels real good to piss, to take a nice long piss. That feels real good. The other thing feels good too, but I don't know. If I had to pick, I guess I would pick taking a nice long pee. I eat pears. Why aren't you vegan yet? Because my taste for meat overwhelms my ethics. Lesbian tater tots. Lightning round. Yo, sexy Steve. I'm a health and excessive nut, and your body structure looks fair and somewhat lean and built. And I was wondering if you were athletic in your younger days. Maybe wrestling in high school. You look like maybe you were a boxer or a runner. Maybe basketball player. Would you consider being athletic now and getting leaner and muscular and athletic? Like I said, you have a good physique and it will suit you nicely. And I'm sure Ashley would be very thankful if you did. P.S. When is Ashley going to be in the next You Had to Ask? Now, I was not athletic in my younger days. I actually have never played organized sports on any level. I never played in school. I never played like in any leagues or anything when I was younger. The most I've ever done is sort of played pickup games of baseball with friends, and I haven't even done that for years and years and years and years and years. So no, I was never an athlete. I certainly wasn't a wrestler or a boxer or anything. I think I'm too busy and too lazy and not motivated enough to get into a really serious like exercise program and really try to get like in really great shape. As for when is Ashley going to be in the next You Had to Ask, I don't know. What? She's listening on her headphones. When are you going to be in the next You Had to Ask? You wanna sit in sometime in the next?
Yeah, whenever.
Yeah.
When?
Whenever. I don't know. Couple weeks from now.
Okay.
I don't know. So, pretty soon. We haven't decided yet. Trevor Slake. Okay, Steve, what about the Batgirl variant cover? You can't tell me that censoring art is okay now, right? No, censoring art is not okay, and luckily that is not what happened. DC Comics both responding to the uproar from people who didn't like that cover and also responding to the personal request of the artist who drew the cover, chose not to publish the cover. That is what happened. Nothing was censored. The fact that you were not offended by the cover and you do not think it should have been pulled, that you think the people who were outraged by it were wrong or didn't have any right to be outraged, does not make it censorship. It wasn't censorship. It was a company, a publisher responding to its audience and making a decision based on them and based on the request of the artist who drew the cover. That's what happened. It was not censorship. That's it for the questions, everybody. Before I get out of here, I'm going to give you a shout out, as I always do. And the shout out this week goes to a really cool channel called DeityFree Dee. This is the YouTube channel of, you guessed it, Dee. Dee is a former Christian, now an atheist, and a lot of her atheist-themed videos view the problems of religion or the debate between atheism and Christianity from that perspective, that perspective of a former Christian. So many of the most insightful atheist commentators or critics of religion are people who are former followers of that religion themselves, and Dee certainly falls into that category. And in addition to her videos about Christianity and atheism, she's also a writer. And many of her videos pertain to her writing. She has a novel underway that she reads from quite frequently. She also does videos just sort of talking about the writing process, how she creates characters. And it's really, really interesting. If you are interested in writing, if you would like to hear the perspective of a writer share their creative process and share what's important to them as a creative person, as an author, it's a really interesting thing to watch. Now, her novel that she is writing now, that she's sort of sharing in her videos, is a fantasy novel. Not my cup of tea, but I know a lot of you are fantasy fans, and I would highly recommend you checking out DeityFree Dee's channel, not just for the atheist content, but also check out what she's reading from her novel. And maybe it's your cup of tea, and maybe you'll enjoy it. Maybe you'll discover a new aspiring author that you can enjoy her work. I think that would be great. And Dee runs a really cool channel, and I'm very happy to give her a shout out. So check out DeityFree Dee. Well, that's it for me, everybody. I'm about to close this shit down for another week, but before I do, I want to remind you to please leave a comment on this video and ask me your question for next time. You can ask me a question about anything. Nothing is too serious, nothing is too silly, and I will answer as many of your questions as I possibly can in the next video. So I'll see you then. Take care, everybody.